Welcome to Two Truths, where we explore controversial topics in religion, philosophy, and history from at least two different perspectives. I'm Dr. Darren Yamarino, and today we're going to be talking about immortality. Now, when looking at the humanities as a discipline, immortality really ties so many threads together. Because if you think about religion, art, philosophy, culture in general, so much of it is about dealing with this fundamental issue that no matter what your age, gender, religious affiliation, race, etc., all of us have to face the reality of our own mortality, right? So we've been attempting to cheat death in a variety of ways all throughout the history of humans. In fact, if we even go back to sort of our cousins, if you will, the Neanderthals, and look at the Shanidar caves in sort of northern Iraq area, and we go back in time to 60,000, 45,000 BCE, that's a long time ago. But even way back then, they were burying their dead, oftentimes in a fetal position. Sometimes there's evidence that these were individuals that were injured, many of them. And that's important because if they were that badly disfigured or injured, they would not have survived to about 40, 45 years old on their own. And it goes to show that kinship, right? Community has always been a huge part of our history. And that's what's going to eventually, over time, right? That desire to come together and to help one another will lead to civilization and will eventually lead to all these other ways of attempting to cope and deal with death. But still, way back, Shanidar caves and our relatives, you have evidence of an awareness of our own mortality and an attempt to do something about it through a mortuary practice, right? Doing something with the body in a ritual type context, even if we don't know the details of that. The fact that they're going back to the same cave for just a long, long period of time. So there's different layers, different groups that have used this cave. So there's something about it. And we have all these different individuals, some of whom were even believed to be like a shaman because there were a bunch of flowers and medicinal herbs in their particular grave. Now, that's been discredited for the most part recently because there are local rodents that can bring in seeds and things that can contaminate archaeological sites. But regardless, you have people being intentionally buried in the same area, oftentimes in maybe like a fetal position, which seems to be almost a regenerative, right, type of pose. So, impressive. And who knows, maybe it goes back even farther than that, and we'll get better evidence in the coming decades. But to fast forward, let's jump to Egypt. Move from Iraq to Egypt. In Egypt, they have early on, before you have the dynastic period. So right now we've been talking about prehistory. Prehistory is the period of time before writing, okay? So in Egypt, you have these pit graves, but they're eventually going to be kind of like lined out with brick. They're going to have something on top of them. They're oval or rectangular, and you have, again, a person in fetal position facing west towards the setting sun, right? With grave goods. In fact, you're going to have more and more grave goods as time goes on. That'll be a part of the expanding notion of an afterlife and more complex rituals as well. Early on, you basically just have like a large food pot, which makes sense because from a magical perspective, right, you need to provide sustenance in the afterlife for the deceased, right? With time, you'll get weapons, cosmetic palettes, like for women. Both of those things suggest that there seems to maybe be a possibility of everyday life continuing in the hereafter. So all that's kind of highlighting briefly the period of time that would fall under prehistory. All right? If we shift gears now to about 3000 approximately BCE, in both Mesopotamia and Egypt, we have the rise of ancient civilizations. Right? Enough people have come together over a large enough period of time that there have been technological advances, there have been religious advances, etc. So in Egypt, since that's where we've been, you're now going to get mastabas, like a one-story house for a tomb with multiple rooms. Then you're going to get a step pyramid. Then you're going to get a full-blown pyramid. I have a separate video that I suggest you watch on that that gives a scholarly, I'll highlight that, opinion of the history of pyramid evolution. But even the idea of a pyramid is very much symbolic of regeneration in the mythology of Egypt. But it goes to show how architecture is being brought into the picture now. Now that you've got enough people, enough money, right, the labor force, you can build these massive monuments, some of which still stand, right, today, which is very impressive. Architecture, rituals become more complex. Religion now is going to become somewhat a little bit standardized when you're in Egypt. Like you've got the pyramid texts, eventually you'll have the coffin text, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, all of these spells that are critical for someone having a better afterlife. Another thing that will come up in our attempt to cheat death, so let's not forget, that's what we're concerned with here today, immortality, right? Well, if we can't somehow keep the body alive and our mind intact beyond 100 years, approximately, right? Well, then maybe we can do something for the next phase, this belief that we do have some type of afterlife. Now, in Egypt, that's going to require a bunch of things, like the opening the mouth ceremony and certain priests, etc. But really, it's mummification that has been highlighted as this fascinating attempt at cheating death. And the Egyptians are going to take 3 different tiers. There's like the rich person tier, the kind of middle of the road, middle class tier, and then the inexpensive, short attempt at maintaining your body. You want to maintain the body because the spirit leaves the body at death, the ka leaves, but it needs to return to the body. And so we have to preserve that. And the Egyptians come up with a pretty ingenious and elaborate attempt, especially with the expensive tier. It takes 70 days to go through this whole process for the expensive attempt. It involves draining the bodily fluids, taking out all the organs except for the heart, including the brain, right? Taking that out. Anything that would effectively lead to accelerated decay of the body. So you want to take all the internal organs out, you put them in a canopic jar, which is going to protect them so they're still able to be used in the afterlife. Then you pack the body with natron salts to desiccate it or dry it out completely. You're going to wash it. You're going to even use wine is a big part of this. And you need to wrap the mummy, of course, right, with a bunch of linen strips. And you may not know this, but there's amulets all over, like over the heart scarab, and a bunch of other amulets that are going to be wrapped up with a wealthy enough individual to help protect different parts of the body in the whole process leading to the afterlife. Right? You might even get a mask. That's a pretty common one, like a mummy mask. So that's a little bit about the mummification. Now, the 70 days is interesting because for the Egyptians, the fact that they're spending 70 days on this process is symbolically linked to the dog star, Sirius. So this is the brightest star in the sky. Okay? And for the Egyptians, as it sort of like disappears off the horizon and then it comes back, it heralds the annual flooding of the Nile. It precedes that event, which is sort of a long and slow event that occurs, which brings life, right? It brings the ability to grow all these crops and have all this excess in Egypt. So they're trying to link a human person dying, right, to this larger process that you see unfolding in nature and in the heavens above. All part of a good, like, symbolic, magic connection there. Now, let's shift gears out of Egypt and move into Western civilization and the dawn of that in terms of Greece, mainly. For the ancient Greeks going way, way back, there's not too much of a understanding or an acceptance of a robust afterlife. You're kind of just air inside a clay pot in a sense, and when you die, that last little bit of air, that's kind of it. But with time, Greek civilization will evolve and get more complex, and you'll have this idea of social immortality. So that's going to be another big stopping point here for us. We've seen the attempt through ritual and religion to maintain the body somehow now, right, through burial practices. But this is going to be different. For the Greeks, it's like even if you don't exist anymore at death, your fame, this concept of kleos, means like glory, renown, but fame, really. And it boils down to a form of social immortality. Why do we want to go to war so much? Why is it so critically important in Homer's, right, Iliad, and even in the Odyssey as well? That concept of kleos is very important. It's because that is what survives for generations. But that won't even survive if we don't have, right, poets and writers. Those two things, poetry and writing, that's what's going to allow spells to be written down, right? If it's in ancient Egypt, or stories of these heroic figures in Greece in various battles, or the Olympics, good example, right? So the Olympics are pretty much almost a simulated warfare, and the people that win the main events in these older Olympic games, they're bordering on godlike, to the degree that you even literally have people who are going to be telling time based on who won the Olympics, which is pretty impressive when you think about that. Imagine saying something like, it's been so many years since whatever, like, Michael Phelps won all those gold medals. That's what they wanted. That's what the Greeks were after. That was the best you could possibly hope for, right? Now, as we continue on with the history of Greece, you're going to get to the philosophers. Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, right? People like this. So Pythagoras, and before him, Orpheus and the Orphics, which I'll get to in a second, introduce this idea that we do have a soul, and it might even be able to be reincarnated. So you think about reincarnation, you're like, hey, that's something coming from India. And it is. But it also exists in the Western world, okay? And was fairly popular in the Greek world for a while, okay? So Pythagoras, not just about a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's not just a mathematical, numerical thing. They've got a whole bunch of other ideas that are really important for Western civilization. Now, Plato's going to pick up on that, and he's even going to make an argument for the immortality of the soul. I mean, one simple example, he has about 5 different arguments for the immortality of the soul throughout his various dialogues. But I mean, a really simplified version is that like contraries produce other contraries. So, you know, action will eventually produce rest, light to dark, right? So that therefore life leads to death, which will lead to life. There's not like an end to this process. It's just kind of like an oscillation between these different dualities, right? So Plato's going to state that we do have an immortal soul. However, he's going to say that the part of the soul that's immortal is the rational part of the soul. We actually have 3 different parts to our soul, and it's only the rational part. Possibly another part, but for sure the rational part is immortal. Okay? And that's why all learning for Plato is recollection, or sort of reminiscing, because the soul already was in contact with all this information and with the forms, the Platonic forms. All right? Another interesting thing about immortality, though, for the Greeks are the mystery cults. There's all these different mystery cults that you could join as an average Greek person. Now, there's sort of civic duties and religious events, but then there's these more like small group, individual things where you could join these different mystery cults. And they promise something a little bit more robust. A lot of them are coming out of this Orphic idea from Orpheus, this important character in Greek mythology who went into the underworld and returned. Orpheus does this. Persephone, as a female figure, does this. And Dionysus is killed and is restored. So this idea of like a dying and rising god, or just the ability to go into the underworld and return, that death is not necessarily the ultimate end, you can see this in the mythology pretty clearly. Okay? Another thing, these Orphic leaders that would kind of try to convert people to this ideology, if you had enough money, you would eventually get like a gold tablet. And we have a lot of examples of these, of people being buried with them. And they have writing on it. And it's essentially stuff for you to remember so that when you're dead, you won't get lost. Pretty similar to the Egyptian idea of the book of going forth by day and having spells. But we have a lot of examples. One of them, this is sort of a famous one. It goes like this. I am the son of earth and starry sky. I am parched with thirst and am dying. But quickly grant me cold water from the lake of memory to drink. So that'll be an important thing, is this idea of a lake of memory. Otherwise, you might drink of a lake of forgetfulness, and then you're sort of out of luck, essentially. So this idea that like the Greeks have, that maybe you could join a special elite group and that they would give you a better chance at a more robust afterlife, that's going to continue on and spread across the Near Eastern world into various Gnostic groups. This is sort of a rival religious and philosophical ideology about 2,000 years ago that was around for hundreds of years, different versions of it. One other famous version of Gnosticism, and this can help segue us into our next subject for immortality, comes from the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas begins, basically, the first logion, with this intriguing proposition. And he said, "Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death." That's the opening of the Gospel of Thomas. So this idea of this like promise, right? That if you get secret knowledge, you might somehow be able to, live forever. Or if you find the right God or get the right plant, or something like that, maybe you can cheat death. In fact, our oldest story really that we even have in a very complete way is the Epic of Gilgamesh. So in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have these enigmatic but, intriguing lines. "You will not find the eternal life you seek. When the gods created humans, they appointed death for humanity and kept eternal life in their own hands." So it doesn't sound very good in that case for the hero, if you will, Gilgamesh. But as the story goes on there, he does find a plant that will grant him rejuvenation, at least, if not eternal life. And what happens? It gets taken and stolen away by a snake, by a serpent. Also a symbol of eternal life, because a snake sheds its skin constantly. So in a lot of ancient cultures, they believe they live forever. So every time we think as humans that we've grasped it, like we found it, a key to immortality, it just slips through our fingers, right? Just like sand slipping through our hands. You can't really hold on to it forever. Now, let's move into another tier here and look at sort of faith and ethical reforms that are going to come about due to religious innovations. Zoroaster, for Zoroastrianism. Right? The Upanishads, if we were in India. Moses and the law, right? There's all these religious figures that will come about that are going to talk about the importance of ethics and following a certain legal code. That's what will give you liberation or salvation in the future. Something akin to a type of immortality. But it isn't going to happen for you if you don't follow the rules, right? That are prescribed by these different ancient religions. Remember, Gnosticism and these Orphics, it was more about knowledge. If you had secret knowledge, you could get in. But now it's more about following the law. And to add to that, the Christian dimension that will change things, Jesus, John the Baptist, Paul, people like that, are going to propose it isn't so much the law that's key, it's faith. Right? Having a proper connection directly with God that matters, right? To have a purified heart, metanoia, to transform your heart and mind. That's what really is key. And you can follow the law without technically ever having that type of sincere transformation to purify your heart. So those are some religious ideas that come about 2000, right, to 2700, something like that in that range years ago. If we continue though on our timeline and now jump to really the age of exploration, so the 1500s, 1600s, when you have all these different people going out and taking different ships and finding out all different parts of the New World, etc., right? There's going to be a lot of legends that they encounter as they go to all these different places around the world. And one persistent idea is that of a fountain of youth, that somehow there's going to be healing waters, that if you drink it or you bathe in it, you will be rejuvenated and restored to the ideal age and health. Ponce de Leon, probably the most famous example of this, where they attempt to find it in Florida, which obviously didn't pan out. Bimini is a Bahamas sort of island grouping that has possibly the healing waters that the locals were telling the Spanish and others as they were coming in. And there is actually a pool in the place that's now known as Bimini if you were to follow today's maps. There's sort of like a natural pool there, but nothing's going to be curing you in the way that you might hope for from a true fountain of youth. Right? But again, cheating death. We want some quick way to get past this. And a fountain of youth sounds like that, right? It's as simple as walking in and bathing or drinking it. Another good example from this time period in the Age of Exploration is going to be the idea of a philosopher's stone. That somehow you can transform metals, plants, and the human psyche and body and mind can be transformed into something that will be really immutable, immortal, like gold, right? Turning your spirit to gold, if you will, or a base metal into gold through the process of breaking stuff apart, heating it, and then bringing it back together over and over again. Solve et coagula, right? To dissolve it, break it apart, purify it, bring it back together again. Keep doing that. A constant refinement of things. Leading to the possibility, though, that there could even be something like a philosopher's stone that just through contact alone could do this work very, very quickly instead of a slower process to cheat death. And that takes us pretty much all the way to now, right? What about the 21st century? It seems like with all of our technological advances, medical upgrades, hey, why don't we have it yet, right? But maybe we're a little bit closer because we might be able to extend life for a lot of people beyond 100 years. And that is something, right? That is an achievement with modern medicine. But it still evades us, right? It's elusive, which has led us to think about our next and last big form of immortality, which is digital immortality. We are all leaving a massive record, whether it's YouTube or other social media, right, accounts and sites, of who we are. We're sort of like life logging in a sense, which is archiving who we are. It's not that difficult even right now to take all that information along with a bunch of footage of you, video, right, high def, just images, stuff like that, and compile that all together into a virtual avatar. This is the domain of what's called grief technology, ghost bots, stuff like this. This is a pretty fast growing industry with a lot of investment in the 21st century. So yeah, we might all still suffer death, but the grieving process and the record that we're able to leave behind is going to blur the lines completely. Because if you can see a high def image, right, of interactive video of me, and it has mainly my sort of way of speaking, right, a lot of my ideas have been logged, let's say, then you can add that to the most advanced sort of LLM, sort of AGI, right? Like Chat GPT style technology. And by putting all those things together, you have a pretty convincing replica of what you were like when you were alive. And a lot of people will choose to do this, and they will choose to interact with their deceased loved ones through this technology. Maybe it makes it so you're never able to like let go and accept the truth of impermanence. Regardless, it's still likely to grow in popularity. How does it work? It's really boils down to, again, as simple as archiving a lot of who you are, sort of life logging, making the avatar eventually become alive, so linking it to some generative AI, and then calibrating it. So ideally you want to do this while you're still alive, and properly calibrate this. So we could put it differently that semantic analysis plus social media plus your unique creative works plus AI equals immortality. So let me know what you think, if you feel like that actually counts as a form of immortality, or if you think that somehow we will be able to, I don't know, fully upload our consciousness or just extend even human life into many hundreds of years. I'd love to know your thoughts and your reasoning behind that. And let's continue the discussion if you are interested through the comments. But as I always in my videos, since we really are still in a transitional phase and we're probably not going to be able to cheat death, well, hey, at least one thing that we can cheat, one smaller type of death, is the death of wonder. Right? Because the death of wonder really is the birth of sorrow. And that happens for many of us early on in life. So that's a death that we can't escape. And it's through studying things like the humanities that allow that to happen. And who knows what might come in the next 50 to 100 years. So as always, let's stay gray.